So it was on his 10th birthday.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
My husband has a tradition where he takes the birthday kid out for breakfast. He went to wake him up, said, "Happy birthday, boy." And Xavier sat up in bed, said thank you, and then collapsed. He wasn't responsive. So I said, "We need to call 911." And then the paramedics came. Then they took him to the hospital and was telling the doctor that Xavier had no history of heart problems. He just looked flummoxed. He's like, what could take a kid from perfectly healthy one day to almost dying the next?
This is the Lost Child podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. We have a guest with us here today, and she's going to share a little bit about her story. Let's dive into the podcast. Thank you, Andy, for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Just to get started, could you tell us your son's name who passed away?
It's Xavier. And that name was suggested by my husband, Daniel. And it's not named after Professor X, but we like that connection. So, yeah.
Nice. Did he go by a nickname or anything, or was it always Xavier?
It was always Xavier.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Do you have a middle name?
Reason. That is my mother-in-law's maiden name.
Oh, okay, cool. Xavier Reason.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about Xavier, kind of his personality?
He loved going to school. He especially loved math and things. He's very independent, did not want any help with anything, even from a toddler buckling into his car seat. He wanted to do it himself instead of having anyone helping him.
Yeah.
I loved playing games. And if no one was available in the family to play, he would play them by himself. Like one of his favorites was Uno Flip. And he would control 4 hands at once, just playing on his own that game.
That's funny. Did he play any sports or do any music or?
He started dabbling in learning how to play the piano.
Oh, cool.
But he wasn't really into practicing. I think he just wanted to try and figure things out by ear. And sports, we did a couple of like soccer camps or swim lessons, but nothing that we really stuck to.
Do you have a favorite memory with Xavier that you just really enjoyed that one time?
Not particularly. I think it's just like his smile and just he always wanted to have fun with things. He, in the last few months, he was really into saying puns and he wanted to be a pun master and things. Just really loved life.
It's pretty fun. Yeah. Can you tell us, or how old was Xavier when everything kind of happened?
So it was on his 10th birthday.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And my husband has a tradition where he takes the birthday kid out for breakfast on that day. And so he went to go to Xavier's room to wake him up and said, "Happy birthday, boy." And Xavier sat up in bed, said thank you, and then collapsed.
Oh my gosh.
And he started gasping for breath so loud that I could hear it from downstairs. And so I went upstairs to see what was going on. He wasn't responsive. So I said, we need to call 911. And we got 911 on the line. They told us to start CPR. And then the policeman came. They took over CPR. And then the paramedics came, were able to restore a pulse. And then they took him to the hospital.
How long did it take to get the policeman or the emergency crews there?
So the phone call was at 6:15.
Okay.
And then the paramedics wrote down that the time that they restored his pulse at 6:35.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And it felt like shorter. Like I was convinced it was only like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Did it feel shorter, but also longer at the same time?
I guess it was very surreal.
Yeah.
The time didn't really exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, while everyone's coming in and working on him, like I just wanted to stay out of the way downstairs. My husband stayed in the room with Xavier the whole time and things.
Did you go and talk to your other children at the time, or
Yeah,
what was kind of like your thought process, and what were you doing during that time?
Yeah. So my normal thing at that time would be to make lunches for my kids. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. The 16-year-old leaves for her bus at 6:40.
Okay.
And I just told her, I can't make your lunch right now. You have to make it. And, so I was just standing at the bottom of the stairs, with another police officer as he's making notes, watching the paramedics as they come out to this, as one of them was pulling medicines out of this big briefcase that had like epinephrine was one of the medicines I gave him, and just a couple others. My 13-year-old at the time was just staying in his room. He didn't have to come out or his bus didn't leave until like 8:05.
Yeah.
And so he actually thought it was some construction workers that were there at the time. When the paramedics restored his pulse, got him able to breathe on his own again, they took him in the ambulance to the hospital. And then I followed in the social worker van.
Oh, okay.
And Daniel stayed home to make sure that Joseph was able to get on the bus and things.
So your kids still went to school?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got to the ER and was telling the doctor that Xavier had no history of heart problems or anything, that there was no drugs that he had access to. And he just looked flummoxed. He's like, what could take a kid from perfectly healthy one day to almost dying the next?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they ran a whole bunch of tests on him: CAT scan, MRI, EKG, echocardiogram, EEG, blood work, genetic testing.
Oh my goodness.
And they found that he'd had a sudden cardiac arrest that was caused by long QT syndrome, which is an electrical problem with the heart. So back up to the MRI. That was at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And all I'd had to eat so far was a couple snacks from the nutrition room. And the doctor had said that my husband should come as well. So he came and met me. But since we weren't in the room for the MRI, it takes about an hour. We decided to go get breakfast across the street at McDonald's. And while we were there, the hospital called us saying, the police is here and they would like to talk to you. And they were very kind with us. We just met in one of the meeting rooms at the ICU.
Did they separate both of you?
They did not.
Okay.
Yeah, they were just really kind to us, saying this is just standard procedure whenever a child codes at home and things. They asked, what happened, again, what history there is, what drugs could he have access to. And then they said that while the paramedics were working on Xavier, one of the officers was poking around and noticed that in Xavier's closet, he only had 4 shirts. He's like, so what's up with that? I'm like, oh, most of his clothes are actually in his dresser that he has. And then they're like, okay, then he also poked into the bathroom and looked in the trash can and found Band-Aids with spots of blood on them. And I was scratching my head. I couldn't figure out what exactly those are from. Xavier likes to play outside. Sometimes he gets scratches from thorns and things. I thought maybe that was it. I realized later it was probably my 13-year-old popping his pimples and then putting a Band-Aid over it.
What were you feeling though in that moment when they were questioning you, in some sense of like, your kid only has 4 shirts. Like, what's the deal with that? How did you feel?
I understood where they're coming from. I've actually had some training. We were considering being foster parents at one point. And so I knew what they were looking for at that point. And I felt like they were definitely doing their due job. And it just surprised me. Wow, they really do due diligence looking through this stuff.
Yeah. Just for some other people that we have talked to, they're really surprised at some of the questions that the police asked them, because it's not something they ever really thought of or had been through some training for foster care or anything. And so it's almost taken them by surprise and almost a little bit offended at the questions, right? But it's awesome that you could understand where they were coming from, especially in that frame of mind that you were at, that you could be like, oh, okay, I get where you're asking. I get why you're,
Yeah. When I'm in crisis mode, I definitely go into just push my emotions down, just get through it, what I need to logically, and feel later. And so that was kind of what was on my mind right now, just still in a kind of state of shock, but just a need to keep pushing forward and doing
so
things
at this
like that.
point, was Xavier like intubated, just
when they wheeled him for the MRI, they did intubate him and sedated him for that. When he arrived at the ER, he was in a coma.
Okay.
And over the next few days, they did wean him off the ventilator.
Okay.
They reduced the sedation. And so he progressed from a coma to a vegetative state where he was able to open his eyes. And he was able to react to pain. He would cry like a newborn when he was distressed.
Going back real quick from like a timeline standpoint so that we all understand.
Okay.
His birthday was when?
October 20th.
Okay. So this is October 20th or starting in October, right? So
weaning off the ventilator was in that first week.
Okay.
And then able to go to the progressive state. Even though his eyes were open, he wasn't able to focus on anything. Like the doctor would have put an instrument and hold it to try and see if he would follow with his eyes, and he didn't. They would ask him, blink if you can hear me, or squeeze my hand if you can hear me. He never did that.
Mm-hmm.
If he were to do those things, then he would progress to the next level of consciousness, which is minimally conscious. And so on Halloween, he had another MRI because when the brain is initially damaged, like Xavier's was from the lack of oxygen, there's a lot of swelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so once the swelling goes down, they wanted to see what the damage looked like.
Okay.
And the neurologist showed us the images and said, yeah, this is pretty severe. And especially to the basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that just coordinates everything. They called it like grand central station.
Mm-hmm.
Just that's where everything coordinates everything. And they told us that it was unlikely that Xavier would be able to progress to minimally conscious. And if he did, it would be unlikely that he would walk or talk again. And at that point, the doctors told us, that we needed to consider what kind of care or what quality of life we were comfortable with. And for that first day, I was in doubt, like just considering the idea that it would be better to let him go caused me physical pain.
And this was early November time frame?
And he was breathing on his own?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Every day his breathing got better and better. Like, first they took off the ventilator and then they put him on oxygen. He was able to eventually get off the oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped needing, he would need suction because he couldn't, when he coughed, he couldn't swallow.
Mm-hmm. And
so they would suction to make sure he wouldn't choke on it. And the need for that became less and less over time. So yeah, in those first couple days of November, my husband and I did a lot of prayer, and the answer I got, because I always thought that if you have a loved one that's in a coma or in a vegetative state, that God would tell you if it would be better to let them go or if they had a chance to recover and keep them on life support. And the answer I got was either choice is okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
was that frustrating?
It was. I'm like, that's not fair. Like, don't leave that choice to me. Like,
yeah.
Because you always hear like, the choice of life or death is for God to decide, not humans.
Mm-hmm.
And you always hear that. And so I was just like, wait, why are you leaving this to me to decide? But yeah, we did a lot of soul searching and research, and we decided that the decision would come down to what quality of life is worth pursuing and what is his outlook.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast.
We decided that the quality of life, like if he could communicate some way, even if it was a yes, no through blinking or something, then it would be worth doing whatever it took to help him. As for his outlook, there was the odds of his recovery. They weren't great, but he had a chance.
Okay.
And we knew that as time went on, his chance would decrease until after about 3 months. It's generally considered persistent or permanent state to be in that. The only life support he was on at this point was artificial nutrition and hydration.
Okay.
And so removing that is essentially starving him. And it sounds bad, but the hunger pains can be mediated through morphine and pain medication. So it's a peaceful death. It just takes a long time. And the other question was like, what is his outlook if he were to stay alive? And a lot of people in a vegetative state don't live longer than a few years. They pass away of pneumonia.
Oh, okay.
Just because it is hard for them to control the fluids in their lungs and things. So we made a few decisions. The first off was that we were going to defer the final decision until January.
Okay.
Just to give him a chance. And the doctors offered a defibrillator that we could have surgically installed to prevent any further cardiac arrests. And we decided to decline that, deciding that if he had another cardiac arrest, that was God's way of saying it was time for him to go.
Was he in the hospital the whole time? Okay.
Well, he was in, I'll get to that when.
Okay.
But yeah, November, he's still in the hospital.
Okay.
We elected to have a G-tube surgically installed. So that way, because at this point he was getting food through a nasal tube and a G-tube is just easier to maintain, it seemed. And then we also decided we would work towards bringing Xavier home. And ideally, we would have liked him to go to rehab, but all the rehabs declined because he was not able to participate in any therapy that they would have for him.
Okay.
So he came home on November 15th after 26 days in the hospital. The hospital set us up with a charity called Hospice of the Valley that provided palliative care for us. They had a social worker, which provided us resources. They helped us get a wheelchair for him, and they provided music therapy for him. And over the next few months, he did have incremental improvements. His eye movements became smoother, but he still didn't really focus on anything. He would turn his head towards sound, so he could definitely hear. But weren't sure if he could actually understand what was being said. And he never did anything on command. In December, we met with Phoenix Children's Neurology. The doctor was an expert in anoxic brain injuries. And so he ordered some tests to be done, an fMRI and a 24-hour EEG. And those were both done in early January. And when those were done, the doctor didn't want to tell us that he had no chance, because you always hear these miracle stories. But he told us these are not the scans of people who recover. And so at that point, my husband and I just looked at each other and like, yeah, it's time to let him go. So we called up Hospice of the Valley and got him switched over from palliative care to hospice care. He still stayed in our home. The Hospice of the Valley has a center in Phoenix called Ryan House. And we could have transferred Xavier there if we felt like there was a burden of witness to it, but we never felt that. And it's nice because it doesn't feel like a hospital. It feels more like a hotel and things like, and they also offer respite care for people, for medically fragile children. Like, it's a really nice place. So the expected time for death was 1 to 2 weeks after we stopped giving him, after we withdrew the artificial nutrition and hydration. It took him 18 days. And at that point, it felt like being overdue with pregnancy. Just want it to be done. It's just frustrating because you have no control, but there's no joy to look forward to at the end.
Yeah.
The day he passed, the hospice nurse visited at noon and said that he was close to death at that point, but not minutes close. He had a monitor called a pulse ox, but that was no longer working because his blood pressure was so low, it couldn't detect anything. So we decided that, and because I'd also heard that some people, when they're getting ready to die, they prefer to do so by themselves instead of when people are around. And so at that point, we're like, we'll just do anything to help him move along. So it's like, okay, we'll check on him every 15 minutes, but we don't feel like we have to be right there with him. We were also exhausted because we had kept vigil the last couple nights when the pulse ox wasn't working. And we also had to take care of the house and the kids and things at that point. So it feels cold-hearted to say that we weren't there with him, but it was the best thing for us. So at 8 p.m., I was folding laundry when Daniel came home from walking the dog. And then he came into the room with me and he said, I think he stopped breathing. And so I went in to check on him, and yeah, he had stopped. And so we called hospice and they confirmed that he'd passed. They called the funeral home. And while we were waiting for the coroner, we got him dressed because he was just wearing a diaper at this point under a blanket, and just give him some dignity with that. And I really appreciated the way the coroner treated his body. After they moved him onto the stretcher to take him out, they covered him with a blanket, and it had a white rose that they put on top. And he gave us a minute to say goodbye before they covered his face and took him out. So, yeah.
And this was January of this year.
Yes, January 30th, he passed away.
So October of 23, October 20th was Xavier's birthday.
Yes.
Of 23. That was his 10th birthday. And that's when the cardiac arrest happened. And then this whole process went for the next 3 months.
Yes. It was a long process. And of course, feelings are still very fresh.
Of course.
Because it is so new.
What were your other kids thinking this whole time?
They tend to keep to themselves.
Yeah.
My 16-year-old was definitely more emotional with things. My 13-year-old, now 14, he would ask a lot of questions and things. He didn't really show emotion and things.
What were some of your thoughts? Take us through kind of your mind. You had said earlier that you get into kind of survival mode,
Yes.
and you just shove down the emotions a little bit and say, I'll feel later. But walk us through even just kind of some of these stages. So the cardiac arrest, driving to the hospital, there still has to be some amount of hope that everything's going to be okay. And then you just keep getting these kind of blows of, well, now he's in a coma. Now he's not doing super well. For the first MRI, brain scans, there's so much brain swelling. Then the second MRI after this brain swelling is going down. Like this is really not a good spot. Take us through some of just how you dealt with some of those blows as they kept going.
Well, that first week, we were convinced he was going to wake up eventually and be better. Like we brought all his toys that he could see to the hospital. And it took a few days to realize, because if after a couple of days, doctor told us like he's going to be here at least a month, and that didn't really seem real at first, but that is what ended up happening, that it was about a month.
Yeah.
After the doctors told us that he was never going to be the same again, that we may not even be able to communicate with him again. At that point, I called my parents who live in Oregon and just said, I just wanted them there with me.
Yeah.
And to help out. And, I always wanted to have someone in the hospital with him, in case, he would wake up like they have in the movies and things. We actually had, after that first week, we were just really exhausted doing that though. Taking shifts, me and my husband, like 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
And so we had friends that would come. My parents came and they helped take some shifts. We had friends that would take some of the night shifts for us, especially those were very helpful. Just so I wasn't so exhausted dealing with that. And and that day after the doctor told us that he was never going to be the same, like I just drove home and I was doing breathing exercises to keep myself from crying so that I could still see the road and make it home safely. It physically hurt.
Did some of the grief you think start then and then also get kind of, for lack of a better term, drug out through the whole process?
I don't know about drug out, but there was definitely grieving through the whole process.
Yeah.
I think because I have heard we've already grieved him before the death. And since I had some of that, I was surprised at how much it hit me later.
Yeah.
After he had passed.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you can't really just grieve somebody, like in your case, and then not have grief after too. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like because you said you did feel grief afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know how, because you said those people said that, we grieved them before their death, but I don't feel like grief just goes away.
Yeah. I feel like in our Western culture, like there's very much just this sense that grief is like you're sad for a while and then you're done.
Yeah.
But it's through listening to your podcast, talking with others, reading, that I've learned that it really isn't like that. It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And general grief, yes. I would say grief for the loss of a child, because that's my experience and that's what I've been able to interview. We've been able to interview people. It's something that doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. It's something that you learn to carry with you for the rest of your life. Christy was on the podcast, and one thing that she talked about was that her heart was really hurt, and it was as if it scabbed over, and then at times it'll weep even more, right? And so it's healing, but it's not healed. And for the rest of her life, and I think for the rest of our lives, it's something that we have to learn to carry, whether it's in a backpack or in a briefcase or whatever it is. We have to learn how to carry that grief with us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, like something I've realized is like, of course I'm sad. I miss him.
Yeah.
And I will always miss him because I will always love him.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There was a talk I remember that somebody was given in the same circumstances. There was a guy that had ran over his son. And he was talking and explaining and saying he was praying to God, just take the pain away. And the answer that came to him, his son was 11 or 12 years old when he died.
Like 8.
Was he 8?
Yeah.
Maybe he was 8. I can't remember. But the answer that came to him when he was praying for God to take away the pain was, I can take away the pain, but I also have to take away the 8 years that you got to spend with your son.
All the memories.
All the good stuff, right? And in that moment to him, he said, never mind. It's okay. I'm okay with the pain because I still get those great days or those great times that I had with my son. So, yeah, the amount of love that we have for our kids, it also causes a lot of pain if they're not there. Hey, Lost Child Podcast family, if you love what we're doing here and want to support us, we started a Patreon account. It's a platform where you can sign up for a monthly subscription to help support our podcast. In the video description, you can find a link to our Patreon account to help share these stories with the world. So please help support the podcast and help support us by visiting the link in that video description. We thank you. Now, back to the podcast.
So what was so you and your husband seem to be like on the same page with everything?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So your relationship's pretty solid.
Yeah, like, if this had happened earlier in our marriage, it probably would have shaken us. There was a point where we went to counseling and we went to classes and things. And I think because of that, we had the tools that we needed in order to communicate with each other and to support each other. With Xavier being at home and me being a homemaker, the bulk of his care fell to me. But my husband also works from home, and he was able to step in and help assist with things like changing a 10-year-old's diaper is a lot easier with two people than one.
Yeah, for sure.
When we've talked before, you had talked about that some of those big decisions that you'd never really thought of. Can you go into a little bit more detail of your thought process and some of those big decisions of having to remove him from life support and even keeping him in the hospital or trying to have him come home? Just some of these decisions that you had to make and how taxing it was on you.
Yeah. So before all this, like, I'd only thought of it like as a thought exercise. Like, it's often brought up like as a moral question, like, is it better to pull someone from life support or keep on going? And yeah, so and it's hard to describe what it was like to be in it besides that initial just frustration with like, I don't want to be the one to make this decision. Like, God, you're supposed to tell me what to do type of thing. And so, and also I'm very much an advocate for disability rights. And so I really did not want this to feel like eugenics at any point. And so it was a lot to wrestle with and say, like, what am I okay with? What am I not? And we did a lot of research. Like, my husband found a academic paper on that had interviewed people that had removed artificial nutrition and hydration and just what the process was like for them. And that was helpful to know what to expect if we chose that way. And in our church says to consult with our bishop, and our bishop's like, I don't really know what to offer you. Like, I can tell you what the doctrine is, but really this choice is up to you guys. So,
did you have a lot of support afterwards as well? After the funeral and everything?
Yes. Yeah, we were selective in telling people that we were withdrawing his life support because we didn't want people to judge us for not giving up, because there's very much a sense of you should never give up. Doctors don't know what they're saying. Anything, there could always be a miracle and things. But through the whole thing, I did not want to hear about miracles.
Yeah.
The first 3 funerals I went to were for children. So I know that God doesn't always answer the prayers the way we want them to. But yeah, we had people bringing by meals as we were withdrawing the life support, and then also after the funeral and things. We had people that came together to make a beautiful memorial table for him. People from church, people from school, like, they were all very supportive of us.
Within this whole process, have you felt abandoned by God at all?
No.
Have you felt supported by him then?
Yeah, I would say so. I definitely points when I was angry and would have conversations with him.
Were you angry at God?
Not necessarily.
Just the situation?
There was one point where I was looking for this page for the memorial table. For the start of 4th grade, Xavier had written an About Me page. So I wanted to have that there. And I could not find it. And usually when you're teaching kids about power of prayer, like the usual story that comes up is someone has lost something, they pray about it, and they walk right to it. Well, I'd never walked right to something before, but I'd always felt like maybe I was inspired of where to look or something like that. So I did pray. And this time I walked straight to it.
Wow.
And I was relieved that I found it, but I was also angry because it was the wrong miracle. And yeah, there were some miracles, like I definitely felt physically supported through it, but it's also not what I wanted.
No, yeah. I can definitely relate that there are little miracles that happen, but they're almost irritating and anger you because I wanted one miracle and I wanted it over here. I didn't want all these little miracles. And had you done the one miracle over here, all these other miracles wouldn't have mattered. You wouldn't have even need to perform those miracles if you just brought my child back to life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, we had 3 months where that miracle could have happened and it didn't.
Are you doing anything now for coping? What do you, like any kind of therapies?
I am not directly. One of my friends recommended this book. She had suffered a stillbirth, and this book is called Bearing the Unbearable by Joanne Cacciatore. And the author of this book is a grief counselor, as well as, and she has also suffered a stillbirth herself.
Wow.
And one of the things she talks in here is about the need to be with grief.
Yeah.
And just let the feelings happen. And so
how do you do that?
Yeah. So I've been depressed before. And for me, it's not about being sad. It's about feeling apathetic. And so I never really feared being sad. And so sometimes when I just feel teary, because I have up days and down days. And so those days when I'm down and feel teary, I just go in a room by myself and just let myself feel it and acknowledge that, yes, I'm sad. Yes, I miss him. And afterwards, I feel a bit cleansed because I've released the feeling instead of trying to bottle it up.
Yeah. Do you and your husband talk with each other about what happened?
Yeah. We cope a lot with dark humor, actually, through the whole thing. Like when he was in the hospital, we would quote Princess Bride, "He's only mostly dead." And just things like that, just to help break the tension and things.
Yeah.
I know it's super, well, okay, first off, thank you for sharing the book. I appreciate that. And to validate what even she's saying and what you do, the grief counselor that we met with right away, she talked about having time to grieve or having a place to grieve, or even, it doesn't mean you have to cry all day, but you need to segment a time away, almost like meditation or prayer or whatever, but you essentially have a time to grieve. And whatever way that is, it could be different for you. For you, it's, I want to go be in a room by myself and I want to feel that emotion. For others, it could be, I want to go on a run and process what I'm feeling, right? But being able to set aside that time to actually grieve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been depressed before. And like I said, it's the apathy that I'm more scared of, because when you're apathetic and not feeling anything, then you stop to care about fulfilling your responsibilities. You stop wanting to care for yourself. And that just leads to a spiral where it becomes very destructive. And so when I recognize some of those apathetic feelings, I'm like, okay, I need to set up some guardrails so that I don't get on that downward spiral. So every day I set a goal to get outside the house, to do some kind of exercise, and to do something creative that brings me joy. For me, that's writing. But I know other people, there's art or baking or whatever else just brings them joy.
Those are really, those
I love
are really
that
good.
you have goals.
What are the three again? Can you give those again?
Doing something creative that brings me joy, getting outside the house, and exercising.
Wow.
And these are very low bars. Like, just taking a super short walk with our dog will count for both getting out of the house and exercise.
Yeah.
And for writing, it's like just 1 or 3 sentences is all I'll be happy with. It doesn't take much. It's just a matter of doing something.
Yeah. I love that. That's
So
awesome.
other parents we have talked to have also talked about kind of a numbing that comes across when you go through child loss. Some of these are very traumatic ones where somebody died in an accident. And so it's that instant like, oh my gosh, and your body just kind of goes numb. I'm curious with how everything transpired with Xavier. Did you ever go through a numb stage, or are you potentially still in a numb stage where you kind of just don't feel anything?
I think that numbness and that apathy are kind of correlated. Like I felt that most, I think, after he passed, just for like a day or two, and realized that I need to do some things to make sure that I do still feel and things. While he was in the hospital and then when he was home, it was mostly just go time. Like just, I had all these things I needed to do to take care of him. And so I don't really feel like I was ever numb at that point because it was still very motivated in love and things. And I did still grieve. Like Christmas was really hard because, after we opened all the presents and I still made sure to give him some and everyone else split off to go enjoy their presents and he just lay there and that's all he could do. And we'd gotten some music for him that we put on, but still just made me sad that he couldn't do what he used to.
Yeah, of course.
That would
Did you like have bargaining stages? Like, did you go through that bargaining stage?
I did. Yes.
I'm sure probably during the whole process of him being in the hospital and being at home and then even
both
after.
Before and after he passed.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've had it.
Can you walk us through some of those?
Yeah. So I mentioned I'm a writer. And so like there's one time I remember before he passed, I was just, because one of the ways I deal with hard things is figuring out how I might incorporate something like this into my writing, fictionalize it or whatever. And so I was thinking along those things because I really do believe that hard experiences like this are well worth exploring in fiction, help bring comfort to others who might have gone through it or just helping other people understand what it was like. And I just all of a sudden had this physical revulsion of, no, the price for this is too high. God, if this is your purpose, I don't want it. And I actually felt God answer to me like, Xavier's purpose in going through this is not so you can create art or whatever. But writing and creating art is a healthy way of processing grief.
Yeah.
And so that was comforting to me at the time, but it was not a one and done. I had a similar conversation after he'd passed with God about that. So yeah, I feel like that was what my bargaining was like.
Yeah. Have you, and I understand it's only not even 2 months removed from when he actually died. Have you experienced any of the other stages of grief that it talks about? Anger, acceptance, depression.
Yeah, so I've already mentioned a couple of them.
Yeah.
Denial, just hearing that, just that physical pain at hearing that that he was never going to be the same and that I would have to consider, like, I did not want to consider that. That was definitely denial there for that. And that lasted like 24 hours at least. And then I was also in denial about the amount of time he was without oxygen. Like, as I mentioned, I thought it was only like 10 minutes. It was only when I looked at the doctor's notes a couple months later and saw the timestamps of 6:15 was the call. 6:35 was when the paramedics restored his pulse that I realized, 20 minutes. This is a severe injury. Like, this is very hard to come back from.
Yeah.
Anger, I mentioned the wrong miracle with finding the About Me page. I've mentioned bargaining, depression, and also the acceptance just of accepting the grief, I feel like is what's helped me with that. Like, I don't know that I can really accept what happened yet, but just accepting that, I feel sad about it and that's okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have people told you that you should feel a certain way or?
Not yet.
No.
I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that people have said to you that's been very helpful within the last 4 months?
I think just telling me that, this sucks. And because then I feel like I don't have to mask when I'm with them. Like I can let the mask off and I can just say, yes, this is awful.
Yeah.
And we can just mourn together about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I found that the most helpful in talking to people.
Yeah. So they're not telling you like how you should do things. They're just there as like a support.
Yeah.
That's
wonderful.
Good. I like that.
Yeah. And like, I've talked with a couple of people who've lost their spouses and just like, that first year is hard, all those firsts, and hearing certain things like, that's hard to deal with, then just commiserate together. Like I found that really helpful.
Yeah. One thing you said is you had listened to the podcast.
Yes.
And this is somewhat similar a little bit to Vicky's story, which is her son drowned and then was in a vegetative state for roughly 2 years.
Yes.
Was there any helpful things that you got from listening to her story?
Trying to think particularly. It was interesting what I found, just how much has advanced in technology medically in that time. Like she talked about how they did not have the brain scans and things back then.
Yeah.
So they couldn't really tell what would happen.
And they didn't know where he was at from a mental capacity.
Yeah.
So that it's almost as they didn't have the good enough information to make the best decision that they could.
Yeah, like the fMRI that Xavier had in January, what that happened was they put him in the machine and then they test, and they're looking to see what lights up through different stimuli. Like they had different visual patterns going to see what would light up with that. They would have someone talking to see if the speech centers would light up for understanding the speech as opposed to random noise. They touched him to stimulate to see if that would trigger anything. And so, it was fascinating to learn all that they could learn from that.
Yeah.
And just what it looks like for a vegetative person versus a minimally conscious person.
Okay.
For that.
And you said he had never reached that minimally conscious state.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I'd learned in my research is that some people who are in a vegetative state, the ones that do progress to minimally conscious afterwards have the same kind of brain patterns as the minimally conscious people. And so obviously Xavier did not reach that threshold.
Man.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Me too. It's a lot and it's very fresh.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your parenting towards your other children has changed at all?
I have become more aware, especially when Xavier was in the hospital and at home and needing so much care. I absolutely did not want my other kids to be neglected because of that.
Yeah.
And I've heard of that before. And there's even a name for it, glass children.
Okay.
Where siblings of special needs children just get ignored and things. And I absolutely did not want that to happen. So, I wanted to make sure that, they still had good birthdays through things and
Christmas.
And that, they had what they needed. My kids have declined therapy so far, though I've told them what's available. I did tell them that they could have mental health days if they needed it. And so my 16-year-old last month, she's studying Of Mice and Men in English, and the teacher assigned an essay on death. And so she asked for a mental health day because she was okay writing it. She just wanted to do so in private.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd let her have that.
Wow. In some of the follow-up on her question, has it changed even just your interactions with them or the things that maybe you will say yes on if they ask or request for something, not even just dealing with Xavier's death, but just little stuff like, can we go get ice cream today? And just just anything like that. Has it shifted any of your
Not really,
stances?
I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to feel like I was comfortable with what I was doing beforehand and continuing that, making sure that we spent time together and things.
Good.
Did your kids help out at all with Xavier?
I never asked them to. I didn't want that to be on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted them to still be kids. So
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
He was set up in the living room. So it was very obvious whenever they walked in and out of the house or came down the stairs where he was and things. But yeah, we never asked him to help with diapers or feeding or medicines or anything. I figured that was a role for the parents to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there was somebody that today was in your exact same situation, what are maybe some things that you wish that you could share with them?
I think I would talk about just that, and as I mentioned, with that I felt comforted in being able to commiserate with others, like just be able to commiserate on how awful this is, and like there's some resources that we've learned about that can help, especially here in the state of Arizona, because a lot of processors are really hard to deal with, getting on Medicaid and things, and just helping out if I could. Like we had some friends come over and they would help with his physical therapy to make sure that they're afraid that his muscles would just lock into place. And so we just moved each of the joints. I try to do that each day to help keep them loose. And so that wouldn't cause him pain. And I do sometimes wish that I had asked someone to come stay the night and those last nights instead of just leaving the nighttime vigils all to us. But I'm also like, I do like that it was just us there. And so, yeah, at least offer, and they could decide something like that. Like there's a lot of help that people want to do. And a lot of it was, I don't know what I need. And so now at least having been through it, I could come up with some of the little things of, oh, this was helpful. Would it help you? Type of thing.
Yeah. That's definitely a true sentiment across almost all the people that we talk about is, I don't even know what I need to help me, especially in the moment. And then even I would say, even where you're at right now and where we're at, there's times where I probably do need help, but I honestly don't even know what to tell somebody that I need help with right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one of someone I know that she lost her spouse. She said that her sister helped her write all the thank you cards after the funeral. And so she offered to do that for us. So we'll probably be taking her up on that because I am starting to get overdue with those.
Yeah.
Oh, I never even wrote any thank you cards.
We were very thankful for everybody that wrote us cards or came or did anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was.
People are so generous.
Yeah.
Very overwhelming.
I couldn't. I don't know. I don't. And then I think we threw away most of the actual envelopes. So we just have the cards. So we don't even know where to even say thank you other than like, here, say thank you if you're listening. But it was overwhelming the amount of
love and support.
Yes.
That was one thing that brought me to tears over and over again was you would just read a card of someone that I hadn't talked to in 10 years or even somebody that I never even knew and they wrote us cards. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I talked to my brother and I hardly ever talked to him before, but he's like, oh, what can I do for you? I'm like, well, some people have ordered us dinner. And so he ordered us Domino's from Oregon
Yeah.
to come for us. So yeah, that was really nice.
What
So
are,
you- sorry.
keep going.
I was going to say, so do you feel like your relationships with your family have gotten better then? Like with your brother and parents and stuff?
Yeah, some. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some actions that irked us a little bit. Just try to let it go. Like announcing on Facebook, as someone did that before we were ready. So, like I would have waited at least 6 more hours before putting it on there. But I just have to let that go.
Yeah.
It's hard too, because I think some people try to come at it with a place of love, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily show up to you as a
Mhm.
place of love, right? And
Yeah.
and that's across everybody we've interviewed. They've talked about how people have said hurtful things or have done hurtful things,
Mhm.
but from the person that did it, I don't think that they understand or even understood that it was hurtful or it could be hurtful.
Mhm.
But for people that are in our position, there are some things that are definitely hurtful or come across in the wrong way.
Mhm.
The advice that was given to us is just have grace with everybody.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Definitely felt that. And yeah, it's hard for me to make friends, I found, but I think this has really helped me to just open up to people and just have people bring me in, and it strengthened friendships, definitely.
Good. Is it hard to let people serve you?
No, not really. And it's hard to ask for it.
Yeah.
But accepting it, I did not have trouble with.
Wonderful.
That's good.
Mhm.
Well, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
There is one thing, like I've heard some people talk about feeling guilt for enjoying other activities.
Oh, yeah. That's also
afterwards.
part of the grief cycle as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's something that we've actually not ever experienced. I asked my kids if they ever felt that, and they're like, "No." Yeah, we feel sad he's not here, but we don't feel guilty that we're enjoying things without him.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mentioned we cope with dark humor, and yeah, I feel like my other kids deserve good experiences as well. We're going to the Grand Canyon next week, so
Oh, cool.
Super cool.
yeah, it's my first time there, so looking
Oh,
forward to
wow.
that.
Nice.
But also, I've learned as a caregiver that you have to take care of yourself or you will burn out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I fell into depression the first time. It's just, I burned out. And that's when I learned, like, you have to take those things that bring you joy. Even if you feel like, no, I have to do all this stuff as well. No, you also have to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And it's a long-term thing too, right? Because a long-term, you want to be able to take care of your kids still. You want to be able to be with your husband. You want to be able to function in society. So the short term would be like, I'm not going to do any of those things. Or I'm going to try to do all those things, but not take care of myself. And then you get burnt out, and that's not good, right?
Mhm.
Versus being able to take care of yourself, and then that will sustain you long-term, right?
Yeah.
If you
Mhm.
continually take care of yourself, you will be able to be sustainable long-term. The short term would be not focus on yourself right now at all, and only make sure your kids and everything's good with them. But then eventually you wouldn't even be able to take care of them because you would be in such a bad place yourself.
Mhm.
So I agree. Yeah. That you definitely need self-care, need to be able to, even like your 3 things that you do right now, they're
Yeah.
very simple. Do something creative, get outside and do some exercise.
Mhm.
It's for you, but so that you can then go and help other people too.
Yeah. I was in a support group at the time, and we always ended that with saying, okay, let's go around and everyone say one thing that they're doing for themselves at this point, just to help reinforce that. So
you said you were in a support group. Was this during the time that he was still alive and like at home?
no, this is from something going through 10 years ago.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, Andy, very much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming over.
I hope this is a good way to honor Xavier. And you have his little picture with you here.
Yes.
It's pretty awesome that you brought him here with you.
Yeah, this is his 4th grade picture taken in
Oh,
September of
wow.
last
Very
year.
recent. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, thank you again for coming, and enjoy the Grand Canyon.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and And remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.